All right. Hello, all. This is Victor Sandrin. I'm recording my final project here. I will be doing a statistical analysis of the NCAA men's Division I basketball data using R. So this data was gathered from, I'll go to the next slide actually to show. This data is a comparison of NCAA Division I men's basketball teams and their tendencies of winning games. This is grouped by divisions and regions to derive trends of winning. Had to do all this grouping myself once I had the data set. This data was sourced from Kaggle and was uploaded by Andrew Sundberg. Now, Kaggle is like an open source. It's just a data forum for anyone who wants data of the sort. This is a generally like pretty layman's data set. I think there's not many terms that need to define here. It's basically a data set of Division I men's basketball teams. It keeps track of how many wins they had over the past about decade of seasons playing games. It tracked a bunch of other metrics that were kind of already derived, nothing significant. It was mostly like free throw percentage, field goal percentage, which tracks the percentage of basketball players making shots. But the meaningful statistics were how many games they won. There was tournament placement. I thought that was interesting too. But the tournament placement I thought wasn't very statistically insightful because as we know, March Madness is like a can be a pretty statistically outlying indicator of general performance. And I thought a greater data set would be more indicative of the metrics we're trying to measure here. So yeah, this data was composed from the past 12 seasons or so. It was relatively incomplete. There were about 12 different CSV files compiled in one large CSV file, which I assume to be a big compilation of all of this data over the past 12 seasons. And I'm assuming this was sourced from another external and just compiled by the user from Kaggle. So with that out of the way, let's continue onward. This significance, this basketball, relatively insignificant in the grand scheme of the greater world. It's This will hopefully settle a lot of Midwestern debates about college basketball and shine light on the fact that over time and through regular changes in basketball team rosters in the NCAA, there's no statistical powerhouse conference relevant to the rest of the NCAA Division One. There are lots of debates, I think, in pop culture and sports media over which college basketball regions will are the most like powerhouse in terms of how many games they win and how powerful they are relative to other regions and conferences. And I think this is all like popular statistics and not really. We have trying to explore this more to hopefully end kind of layman's debates about just which basketball teams we think are the best and how certain regions might prevail over others in like in the popular culture, but not really in when the data shows it up. So my methodology, data cleaning was very necessary as data consisted of duplicate values of the years. So for example, lots of teams had data instances of a certain year season, such as like 2017. There were like three instances of Wisconsin's 2017 season. So I had to clean these as they were probably sourced from a variety of external sources and compiled, meaning that we had these duplicate values. I filtered by distinct year values before proceeding and then create a clean data set of only the team, year, wins, and conference, eventually sorting by the top six conference groups. This was to ensure that we didn't, there were a lot of smaller conferences within this Division One, and these didn't provide a large enough, sample size for us to draw any significant conclusions, especially compared to these larger ones. I thought it would be irresponsible and probably not the best indication of the true um, performance of these teams. It was also very hard to examine on the huge line chart as we had um, lots of points, often overlapping. So I thought we'd keep it these top six conferences as they're kind of representative of what most NCAA Division One fans will be seeing. Continuing onward, I first explored these original data set by simply using the head and summary functions to examine the data at hand. And this was done after creating a cleaned data set of only the relevant variables without duplicates as well. So once I had this original data set, we examined it using the head and summary functions. And then, as I mentioned on the previous slide, we created a clean data set using only the relevant variables, such as team, region, conference, and wins. So this was to remove all duplicates and to look at the variables we were interested in exclusively so we could plot them easier. In order to draw conclusions from this data set, I created a line graph of conference wins by year over time to visualize relative victories by each conference as a general inference of conference strength. Now, this is probably one indication. There are various others that this data set could have provided, such as field goal percentage, points per game. But I think these are all relative to the teams that they're playing and doesn't really indicate the where we trend to over time. So some teams might have higher points per game only as a matter of playing teams that are, let's say, less skilled or have less people than them, and that doesn't really generally indicate their performance on a grand scale. Over time, we can assume that wins is like the above all statistic that should level out to about the true statistical mean. So this was the one I decided to measure. First of all, our first results, this was my table of conference wins by year. So we can see here they're the top five conferences, the ACC, Big Ten, Big 12, SEC, and I'm not sure what WCC is, but that one's relevant. What's interesting here is a lot of these points were only measured in 1 year. I think, um, as I mentioned later, there might have been some difficulties in the filtering. But as we can see here, the Big Ten and WCC start off the strongest relative, but they're all in the 30s, around the 30s, except the SEC, which is slightly under 30 in 2015. But nothing, there's not a huge range here, and they all seem to have an indicated downward trend from 2017 onward, which doesn't seem to be too, it seems relatively significant, but we can assume this is around the COVID season break. So nothing that wouldn't be, it's out of the ordinary and statistical outlier, but not expected for the time, but very expected for the time. And they all trend in a similar direction relative to each other. The it seems the SEC and or the WCC and the Big 12 weren't hit as quite as hard as the Big 10, but this of course can be due to a number of different variables due to this time period. And then finally, here's our results of the divisions and conferences, number of wins per year, but this is by team specifically to examine if there are any teams that are trending significantly. And interestingly enough, these teams all seem to be around starting at 35 and dipping down to 20 or in the mid 20s by the COVID years. Um, so general conclusions we can draw that there is no largely significant difference between conferences and teams that can be explained by expected null distribution data sets, and the same can be said between the teams as we mentioned. And these findings are unsupported as I feel unequipped to go through any statistical analysis such as p-test or ANOVA. And they consist of incredibly small sample size once filtered, indicating that probably need to work on filtering methods, as I mentioned earlier. There's a significant chance that my filtering removed a lot of the significant data along with duplicate data, as the years and data weren't all supported. In Kaggle, so there should have been more, about 12 seasons. So this might have been user error, probably, or the data set might not have been equipped to it completely to analyze data by conference in this manner. So I think that should be everything. Thank you all so much for taking time, and have a great evening. I'll stop recording.